Hey everybody, how you doing today? Whether you're watching this live or in the future on replay, I'm Pete Calandra and this is episode 6 of Inside Track, my weekly music live stream where I'll just pick a topic and maybe for about an hour or so do a discussion on it, an exploration. And for today's video, I thought I would take a look at the use of motives in developing melodies. So, as some of you may know, part of what I do is I'm an adjunct professor at the Copeland School of Music, Queens College in the City University of New York. And this is my 9th year of teaching. And I teach music technology, film scoring. I've taught undergraduate composition classes. I've taught graduate students private composition lessons. And uniformly, even with graduate students that are in the jazz program and that are very good musicians, they can really play their instruments. They're really very, very gifted performers. One thing I find as a through line with all my students, 95% of them, is that they all, generally speaking, have issues writing a great melody. And I think that that's true for most musicians. It's difficult. And why is it so important to be able to write a great melody? Well, a lot of reasons why. While it's true that rhythm is the most important facet of music, and harmony brings the emotional content to music, the thing that most people remember is a melody. And I tell my students that as you go into the world as a composer, whether you're working in film or television or just writing songs, that your ability to write a melody will have a direct effect on the amount of money you make, to put it bluntly, you know? So, for example, I've written close to 50 network theme songs for sports programming here in the United States. And you can hear my dog barking in the background. There's somebody outside making a lot of noise. Hopefully it's not coming through the microphone. The one uniform thing that every one of those themes has is a recognizable mnemonic, a short phrase that people can recognize as this is the show that you're watching, right? And you're branding the programming. It's very important. And for me, it's being able to do that has made the difference between mic volume is a bit low. Thank you. I'll turn it up. There, how's that? Is that better? Brought. So basically, all of these. Okay, so let me know if this is better. I turned the audio up here. I'm not quite sure why everything looks like it's about the same. Okay. So, all right. You guys will let me know if this is a good volume. So what I was saying about these mnemonics is that they're the short phrases at the end of or at the beginning of the piece. So, for example, if you think about like the NFL on Fox or some other stuff, is that you can hear that 5 or 6 notes and it's instantly recognizable to you. So these are things that are really important. And what all of those things have in common is that they're written out of a motive. All right. And I'm going to show you through the exploration of a bunch of different pieces of music how great composers have utilized that throughout the course of history, actually. So let's take a look at the split screen All right. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Harry. All right. So it's always good, I think, to look at a definition of something if you're going to talk about it, right? So the definition of a motive. So if you're talking outside of music, it's something such as a need or desire that causes a person to act. So it causes a person to act. So you can sort of maybe transpose that or transform that into a musical idea, right? But let's look at number 2, a recurrent phrase or figure that is developed through the course of a musical composition. Or another word that's related, motif. The composition's recurring flute motive is a motif. So another way to look at it is a motive is a short musical phrase, a salient recurring figure, musical fragment, or a succession of notes that has some special importance in or is characteristic of a composition. It's commonly regarded as the shortest subdivision of a theme or phrase that still maintains its identity as a musical idea, right? So the motive has to have almost be complete in itself as an idea that you can work with. All right, thanks, guys. I appreciate that you telling me about the audio. I just turned up the mic gain, even though everything on my levels on my signals looked good before. I just hope I'm not going to distort. All right, so let's take a look at our first musical example, and we're going to go back to this very basic piece, the Bach First Invention in C major. Now, the inventions are contrapuntal works. They're educational tools. They're amazing compositions, and while they're related to the fugues and preludes, they're different in that a fugue subject is typically longer and more developed than the motive inside of an invention. So let's take a look at this first one here. Right? So again, this is a pedagogical piece. So we have got things that are typical when you're learning how to play the piano. So you've got a figure here, right? This little first couple of first 7 notes. You can play them without moving your hand position, the first 8 notes. Right? And they consist of a scale and then... And another important thing rhythmically is that they don't start on the downbeat. There's a 16th note rest. Right, in this next phrase. And then the piece goes off. I'm playing that from memory, but you can hear how he right, he sort of inverts it, but you still get this kind of phrase in there, and that's worked through the entire piece. So that's like an introduction to this type of a thing. And let's look at number 13 in A minor, and this one here, he's sort of outlining a harmony. Right, so it's the first one is E minor, and the second one is part of an E7 chord, the 5 chord, and he has the third in the left hand. So you could see with a piece like this, and right now we're talking about the classical language, Baroque music, and eventually we're going to get into more contemporary stuff. I'm going to do this sort of semi-historically, right, with this. So let's take a look at that phrase, and you could... You could sort of improvise even, right? I mean, he goes through... Right, so he goes through and he takes that idea and he works it through the entire piece. This is really a great piece. But you could see how it again starts on the second 16th note. and it phrases boo-doo-be-ya, boo-doo-be-ya, right? And they both outline a chord, right? A 1, 5, 7, 1. And then when he does it in C major, he does after the exposition is over, he brings it in C major, goes up to the relative major for it's not really a development section, but for the next bit, he goes to in C major, C, G7, C. So you could see how that sort of all works with Bach there. And if you look at Bach he wrote motivically quite often, but that wasn't his only thing. Because if you look at I don't have the music here and I don't want to sort of pick it out by memory, but if you look at the one of the pieces from Wacht auf, he can spin out an incredibly long melody that's filled with motives. All right, let's take a look at our next example here, and we're going to go ahead, maybe 125 years or so. Oh, that's tiny. Nobody can see that. Let's make that bigger. And I'm going to play this very gently. So this is the first movement of Brahms's Fourth Symphony. And I'm just going to play a very, very reduced version of this. Right? So let's look at that melody. Whoops. So, okay. So with this one, the Bach happened after the downbeat. With the Brahms here, he's leading into the downbeat, right? So you're on 4. This is written in cut time, so it's almost feels like a pickup. So, and what is he doing here? He's using a 2-note phrase, a quarter note and a half note, and he's outlining different notes of the chord, right? So we're in E minor, so the first one is 5 to 3, right? So we've got a B to a G, and then we still have the E minor, so we've got an E going to a C, which is the third of the A minor chord that's in the second measure over E. So in other words, we have these chords that are just keeping that E in the bass, and he's using sort of common tones to lead in to the next measure. So what do I mean by common tones? Right, so the first one is right, and then the next one is E and C. So the E is both in the E minor chord, it's the root note, and it's also in the next chord, the A minor chord, as the fifth. And then the C, which is the third of the A minor chord, and now he's going to a B7 chord over E, right? On measure 3, and so he's got the A, which is the seventh of the B. It's the root note of an A minor chord, but it's also the seventh of the B7 chord to the fifth of the B7th chord at the downbeat of measure 3. And then now he's got that D sharp going on into the downbeat of measure 4 of the B. And the next chord, if you look over here in this measure here, right, it's an E minor chord, but he gives us the D sharp there, right? So you see how he's preparing that. And then he jumps this octave, which we've got that at the end of the first line, this note here. That's the tonic of the E minor chord. And then he jumps that down an octave, and he's going to a C major chord where that E is now the third, the fifth of E major, but it's leading us into the next chord, which is a G major. So that's a G, and then a B, which is the third in G major. Then the fifth in G major, which is that D, and then down an octave to another D over a D minor chord, right? So you see how he's sort of preparing us for the chord with the melody, but that's very simple. So you could see how that there's a lot of harmony in that motive, but it's the rhythm that repeats over and over again. It's 4, 1, and 2, right? 4, 1, 2. So it's a quarter note into a half note. And he's doing multiple levels of preparation, right? So also when you're preparing, it's funny because people think of rhythm and they think of doom, doom, pop, ta, pop, boom, boom, pop, right? And that is rhythm. But what he's doing here, preparing you for the next harmony with a common tone on beat 4, right? That also is a kind of part of a rhythm and timing. You could sort of also kind of make a case that that's different than what we currently in modern times think about as rhythm. All right, so that's kind of really interesting, and I love that piece. If you haven't heard that, you should listen to it. It's really an amazing piece of music. And let's move a little further ahead into the 20th century, and we'll look at one of my favorite composers, Bartok. And this is for the children's. He's got 2 books of children's music, and I did not forget to switch the screen, which I tend to do in my classes. All right, so let's take a look at this, right? Okay, so what does he have here? That's motivic, right? So he's got the phrasing da 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 ya da 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 ya da da ya da da da. So the first 2, right, measures, then answers, then a different, right? So you could see that right there. That's very motivic. And then let's look at, and basically that's, right, it's 3 eighth notes, 4 eighth notes, and 3 are repeated to another note, 3 are repeated to another note, and then this is the next measures. It's related, but it's a little bit different. So this is basically the 7th of an A minor chord to the 3rd of a D minor chord, then the 3rd of an A minor chord, then the root of the F major chord with where the melody notes are. So you notice that another important salient feature is that he's giving you chord tones on these melodies, right? But he's avoiding the tonic, right? So what do I mean by that? Well, or he's avoiding the root note of the chord also until measure 4. So that's another motivic idea, and I'll show you how that works in the following 4 measures. So what do I mean by that? So that's a G over, right? That's a 7th of an A minor chord, right? So then there's the 3rd, and yes, we do have the tonic right there. So notice how he approaches the tonic. It goes up, down, and it's on the and of 2, so it's a very weak beat. And then the next one we start on the 3rd of A minor, and then right here we've got the root of the chord right on the downbeat, and then again starting with the 5th, and then right here the tonic of the root of the chord is in the right on the strong beat there. So in other words, he's saving the root of the chord as the melody note at the end of measure 4 and at the end of measure 8, at the end of the first phrase and at the end of the second phrase. So measure 4 and measure 8. So that also is a kind of longer, it's a longer phrase of the motive, right? So in other words, instead of a motive just being, it's 4 bars, and then you've got the root of the chord on the downbeat, then another 4 bars and the root of the chord on the downbeat. And then let's look at the next bit here, starting right over in this measure here. So right here, rhythmic. So there's short little bits. So that whole thing, there's all these different. Yeah, I'd say concoction of both is possible with a motive if you're a really good composer. You know, yeah, I'm going to show you in the next one, Bharat. I'm going to show you using chord tones as the motive, right? Certain chord intervals. So we'll get into that I think in the next one, I believe. Yeah, in the next piece we're going to look at. So, right, so you could see that this is just a three note, one, and then the answer, and then the three notes come back in, right? Then the three notes come back in. So you could see how he's got that da 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 as the motive there. It's very plain. It's very easy to see. And what's great about this is that, for me, personally speaking, is that the melody is very simple. Very simple. But it's the setting of it, right? And also how he phrases things that makes it a little bit more, it's simple but not simplistic. You know, there's a kind of a difference there. So. All right. So that's as much classical music, or, you know, what we consider classical music, that I'm going to look at here. Let's move ahead into American music, and we'll take a look at a very, very famous song written by Jerome Kern, probably in the 1920s. And this is All the Things You Are. Charles Mingus did a really funny variation on this song, and it's called All the Things You Could Be Right Now If Sigmund Freud's Wife Was Your Mother. That's kind of a funny thing. Okay, so let me play this and then we'll talk about it. I'm only going to play up to the bridge. So. All right, so this is a great song, and even if you don't like it, the reason it's great is that every jazz musician knows how to play this song. And it's been played for almost 100 years. And if we were in regular times now and there were people playing, you know, gigs out, this song would be played every day by somebody. But let's take a look at it. So there's two ways that you can look at the motivic development in this. Well, at least two ways. The first one is that you've got an 8-bar motive. And then it repeats a fourth lower. A little variation. So that's one way you could look at it. If you want to simplify the melody without all the extraneous rhythms, so there's your melody. Up a fourth, down a fifth. Right? So that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it. And so the last bit with the motive with this, so you've got an intervallic motive that happens every measure in the background, sort of like the structure. Then you've got a rhythmic contour that's 8 bars long and then repeated. The whole thing's repeated with a little variation. Then you've got a 3-measure motive. What do I mean by that? So if we look at measure 1, 2, and 3, right? And then, so you've got that. Well, it's actually like starting on, it's measure 2 and 4, 3, and then measure 3 and 4, measure 5 and 6, right? Not a three measure thing. It's these 2 measures repeat the rhythm. And then the last motivic thing is that on the downbeat of almost the entire A section to the song, you have the third of the chord. So that's an A on an F minor 7th chord, A flat, then B flat, so it's the third of the B flat minor 7th, then an E flat 7 with a G, and there's your third right there, A flat major 7th, but he just delays it by a beat, and then so what's nice about this is he gives you the third right here, and then he delays it by a beat, and he gives you sort of a common tone between the G, which is the third of the E flat 7, and then it's the major 7th of the A flat 7. And then he repeats that sequence here with the D flat to the G7, except that this is the dominant 7th of G7, and this is the major 7th of A flat major 7th. So you could see how this is very, it doesn't sound like it, especially like if you get somebody who can perform it really well, and they just, and they start doing, you know, variations on it and stuff. It sort of can get a little bit disguised, but it's right there. It's very plain to see. So we're still back in the early part of the 20th century, and we'll continue there for the next few songs, and we'll be moving forward, right? So let's look at another great American composer, Duke Ellington, and this is his song Prelude to a Kiss, and this is another A-B-A song form, and 32 bars, and let me just play the A section for you. Okay, so let me just play the melody without the chords. And so you've got this. So you got B here, going down a 5th to this E here, and then you've got G sharp going down a diminished 5th, or an augmented 4th to this D right here. So that's your goal notes. But the way that he works this is that he fills it in chromatically. So there's your motive, and then it's transposed. And then what's cool about this is that the harmony here that he sets this to is really very sophisticated. So we get into, on that D7 chord, that B is the 13th, and then goes to the 9th, and then to the 5th of C, to the major 7th of F, and then now, right, again the 13th, 9th, 5th. Instead of going to a D major 7th, we're going to a D minor 7th. So we've got. So we have a harmonic sequence as well as a melodic sequence, right? So I find that to be really, really really, really interesting. Yeah, this is a great song. If you don't know this song, this is another really wonderful song. So we've seen how there's not just like an idea, like on the Bach or the Brahms, that there's a melodic contour that can be motivic. We see with a piece like this, and with the with the next one, we're going to go. I have these in order. We're going to look at a little out of order. That there's also a harmonic sequence as well, and that's also motivic, right? So. Right, so you can improvise those chord sequences, right? And you can just... They can also be sequential and motivic. And I don't know how many of you watch some of the Saturday night concerts I put on, but I use a lot of these principles when I improvise, right? I use motivic ideas in the background in terms of the chord progressions that I might improvise, and I'll use them sequentially, and I'll transpose them down by a third or up by a third, or I'll like, for example, something like. So that was 3 chords, right? So I went A minor, F major 9th, D minor. Then I transposed the whole thing up a minor third. C minor, A flat major 7th, F minor, and then I transpose it to E minor. And you could see that, like, once you start understanding this kind of activity, that you can infuse that into your, if you play keyboards, you can infuse that into improvisations and have them make sense. You got to practice it and understand all this stuff and know the voicings and work on that. But it sort of, it sort of infuses my improvisations and my compositions as well. All right, let's take a look at another. We'll start moving into 1940s now. And this is a song from a movie in the 1940s written by David Raksin. It's a black and white film noir, and it's a detective movie. It's called Laura, and 95% of the score is based upon the motive here. So what we'll do is we'll play just the first 8 measures of this. And this, again, another famous song. All right, so what's he doing here? Well, again, extended harmony, right? He's avoiding the root note of any of the, in the melody, he's avoiding the root note of the chords that he chooses. Oops, sorry. And so you've got that. So he's basically playing a phrase and then transposing the whole phrase down a whole step, with just a little bit different at the end here. Measures 3 and 4 is a little bit different than measures 7 and 8. So you've got this very strong and again, So you could take something like that and you could just right, so I could just improvise something like that, and it sounds like it's together. Here, let me get the screen on so you can see the sheet music. I did it again. All right, so you see ninth, then you got this. So ninth, then you've got the augmented fifth to the 13th, then to the ninth of the chord, to the ninth of the chord, and then back to the sixth of the chord. And then the whole thing pretty much repeats. All right, so there's your motive and your harmonic motives as well. Let's move forward to the king of motivic jazz composers, Thelonious Monk. And we'll take a look at this track here called Well You Needn't. I'm just going to play it very simply. D4. All right, so what's he doing here? Well, so he's got that rhythmic motive. He's also got a figure here that are just basically an F major triad with like a half tone approach note to the fifth on the end of 4, and then he moves that up to a G flat chord. So in other words, you go from the B, and then this is an F triad, basically arpeggiated, and then he's got this 2-note phrase here, which is the 6th of G flat to the 3rd of G flat. So the chord progression is 3, 4, 1. Then, right, so the first time on the G flat, it's these 2 notes, and then the second time. So you see how he repeats the phrase 3 times with a little variation in the middle one, and then there's the answer. And that's another little motive. And it's kind of based on this here. It's the same 3 notes. And why that's important is that if you look at the bridge here, right? Oops. Right, so I could play that better, but you could see it's, you know, he's taking this idea here and just sort of working it through the whole thing. It basically comes from those first 3 notes of the opening here. This whole bit is kind of developed off of that. And then what ends up happening with this one in particular is that you get an incredibly catchy tune. And that's the one thing about Thelonious Monk's music, is that it's very catchy. Whether it's this or or right, all of his tunes, they're incredibly catchy. And because he takes these motives and he just drives them through the whole piece, and he takes them on a little journey through all the different chord progressions, or turns things around rhythmically and does all sorts of really cool stuff with it. So he's like, he's an amazing composer. Incredible. Okay. Let's see. So we've got a few more of these to go through. So let's take a look at arguably one of the most famous songs of all time. Yeah. All right. So there's a video on YouTube where a YouTuber, and I don't know whether it was Adam Neely or somebody like that, somebody who's young and talented, where they disputed that, let me switch back, that this is actually the melody notes. Like if you listen to Paul McCartney sing, he's not really singing GFF, but we're going to assume that, and he made a very compelling argument, a very compelling video. Yeah, Starlight, that's a very good point. Motives are a common ground upon which to walk, and they stick in your ear, and you want to see them go through like the chords and all the different form of the track, and how you can develop them. So for example, if I were to take let's say I took that opening to Around Midnight. So the chord is an E flat minor chord. But what if I played that same riff on an A flat minor chord? Right? And what if I played it on a D flat major chord? Or on a G flat major 7th? Right? And what if I played it on a B, some sort of a B chord? Or a D? So you see how you can take the same content, and depending upon how you set it, it has a completely different feel to it. And that's part of the thing about developing a motive over the course of a piece, whether you're writing a pop tune or a film score or a classical piece, is that's part of the journey and the story that you're telling with the music, is how you set these things. And the harmony definitely has a big part in terms of how you perceive the motive, right? So for example, with the Duke Ellington, well, what if I did something like this? Right, that's like so much different, right? Not as good, obviously, but so much different. All right, so let's take a look at this particular song, and I'm just going to play through the A section, all right? Whoops. One more time. All right, so the first thing to notice about this particular song is that the A section is 7 measures long, which is very unusual, and it doesn't sound uncomfortable. Maybe it's because people my age have heard this song a million times and we're used to it, but it sounds very natural, and to write a 7 measure phrase that sounds very natural is very easy to do. So what's he doing here? Well, let's take a look at measure 1, measure 3, measure 5, and measure 7. And I'm just going to play those in isolation. So we're in the key of F. So what he's doing here on every iteration, except for the last one, is he's starting from a tone that's not in the chord, not in the triad, and then resolving it to that triad. So what do I mean by that? So the first chord is an F major chord, and So the second, right? And then on the next one, he goes to the E up on measure 3 right here. Right? So it's the second again, but on a minor chord. And then over here is the suspended fourth to the third. And on the last one, he gives you some nice consonant chord tones, the fifth to the third. So that's kind of interesting. But in addition to the two-note motive being from the second to the root, from the fourth to the third, and then from the fifth to the third, he also has this other bit here, the connective passage between this and this. Right? So he gives you this scale. The first time it goes up, second time it goes down. Nice variation. But it's kind of like a rhythmic sequence. So you have multiple motivic ideas going on at the same time. It's really kind of cool. And the way that he ends it is he gives it this very simple all chord tones. Third, fifth, root, fifth, fifth, third. I mean, there's the major seventh, but when it gets to the F chord, that's a third. So that's really, really interesting to me, right? So that's it's how he connects the two-note motives, right? Okay, fun. Let's move forward. And let's start getting into film music here. Yeah, so the next 4 that I'll be doing over the next 15 minutes or so are all from different films. All right, let's start out with this one. And Henry Mancini. Very famous song, right? Everybody knows this. We played it when I was in high school when I was in the stage band. Now, this has actually kind of 2 motives going on at the same time. You've got that, right? So you've got that little thing in fifths right there going up chromatically. But let's take a look at the melody. So he's got those little 2-note, those little dyads there. So what's he doing there? Well, there's a pickup into a strong beat, into a beat, right? And if we look at the notes on the beat, he's outlining an E minor chord. So if we look right here, the beat 1 is an E. Beat 3 is a G. Beat 1 is an E. Beat 2 is a G. Beat 3 is a B. G. And then to the 7th, because we're on a C chord here. Because we want a little blues kind of riff there. And he's approaching it from a half step below. And then in this case, a half step above and a third. But basically, he's approaching it. So you could see how that could become, that's a very standard thing for melodic ideas, is to approach things from a half step below. So in other words, so just to improvise something like that, you could sort of see how you could work something like that, or if I were to just, let me think for a second. Right, so on improvising something like that, the first pitch, I'm on an E minor chord, and I go from the ninth or the second to the third, and then the same thing, second to the third, right? But not chromatically. Some things lend themselves to chromatic more than others. Or I could do even something like this, right? So that kind of a two-note idea really works well in a variety of formats. And, you know, this is so incredibly catchy. Right? It's so simple, but it's so catchy, and it works so perfectly for the movie. All right, let's take a look at the next example I've got here. And Bernard Herrmann, heavily influenced by Bartok, one of my favorite film composers. And this is from Vertigo. So let me just play through this. Let's see. Let me make this a little bit smaller so that I can read the whole bit there. Actually, let's do this. 2 pages. Great. And let's make this a little bigger. Well, I'm cutting off this music there. All right, here we go. Let me play a little bit of this. So this is from Vertigo, right? All right, so let's take a look at what he's got here. So the motivic idea here is resolving the extended harmony chord to a more consonant note. So what do I mean by that? So let's take a look at the first measure. So we've got E, G, B, D. Right, so that's very consonant. So if I were to just play a C major chord underneath that, right? You know, that's a way that you could harmonize this, or you could do it in A minor. And that's a thing, but it's not as good as, right? You got that. You got the sharp 4, the Lydian sound over that A flat chord. And then he emphasizes it again. Whoops, sorry. And then now he transforms it. So ninth or the second. So if I'm right over here, right? So he's taken that idea of a step above resolving to a chord tone, right? Taking that idea, and the first iteration, so he's going from this sharp 4 of the A flat chord to the major 7th of the C major 7th chord. And if you think about it in the key, it's the second, right? It's D, which is the second of the key of C, but it's also, we're mixing modes here between minor and major. Right? So in other words, if I were to just play the chords, right? And the common tone is the C between the first two chords. And you're mixing modes between minor, where you would find the A flat major triad, and C major, where the rest of that opening bit is in terms of the melodic content. Because you see right here, we've got very clearly a bunch of E naturals. And then in this chord, we've got an E flat. So, right? So, sharp 4 to the 3rd, 7th to the 3rd. Repeat with just a little variation. Now here, that gets transformed, right? Because we're going to an A flat minor chord, and then we go 9th, right? 9th to root, 9th to root. But meanwhile, if we look at the rhythmic and melodic, the rhythmic idea here, this is a little bit different. He does a variation, because instead of this being A flat on the downbeat for 2 beats, which it would be here, he gives you a 4-note phrase where he fills in an idea, and it's descending. So it's related to the second and third measures. And then you see right here, the rhythm of this is very similar to the rhythm up in this area here. But he's transformed this, right? So we're not going from the sharp 4. Whoops. We're going from the 9th, 9th, 9th. And then again, now over here, he also does this bit here where got the 2-note descending thing, but instead of going to a solid chord tone, it's going to get a little bit more extended. So what do I mean by that? And this is sort of how he's transforming and developing the idea as this melody is unfolding, right? So here, he's got the major 7th to 6th, major 7th over a minor chord to the 6th, repeats it, and then just embellishes. And then again. Then again, 9th, 9th. So let me just reiterate that. So from here to here, so this measure, this measure, this measure, and this measure, he's got the major 7th resolving down a step over the C major chord and over the F minor chord with a major 7th here, and then that repeats. Then starting here, he transitions back to the 9th, right? But the 9th, he sort of confuses the issue here, and this is part of transformational development as the piece is unfolding. So we got the 9th, now you get the F, right? And then 9th, and then C the 9th to the B flat. All right, so let me play that whole bit again with that little bit of understanding, and you could see how Bernard Herrmann, this is one of his compositional techniques. This is a great score. This is one of the great film scores of all time, in my opinion. I teach this in my film scoring class in the fall semesters. So let me play that just that much again, and hopefully I'll play it without making too many mistakes. Do that again without the telephone in the background. I thought I had the ringer off. Spam. That came up on my phone as spam risk. All right, one more time. And another thing to note too is the beauty of the setting, right? It's not no, it's very spare. And then if I go down to this area here, right, he's got this voicing, and he voices it this way when you look at the orchestrated score, right? It's sort of an incomplete chord. In other words, he doesn't put the fifth in there. And why is that? Because, first of all, it would make it muddy with this A coming up, and he wants to emphasize that top note. And one of the ways that you do that is leave a lot of space. So if I was going to play the piano and I wanted to voice a chord like that, which is just 5 notes filled in, that's really hard to bring out the G. But if I were to spread that out, right, you can hear that top note because I've got a wider interval between the note below it. So he's doing that. And so the whole thing, right, he's got the third and the, right, and then, so when the chord is playing the major seventh to the sixth, which is these 4 measures here, he's got the root and the third in the inner voices. When it's playing the ninth, he's got the third and the fifth. You see what I mean there? So in other words, for this measure, it's, so you got the major seventh, you got the C and the E, that's your third, first root and third, and then you got the major seventh above it. And right here, you've got the ninth with the third, that G flat right here, then the B flat is the fifth and the ninth. And that's because of another technical thing which I could do a lecture on, and upper structures of chords. So like a major seventh chord, C, E, G, and B, is also the upper structure of an A minor ninth chord. So if we just drop an A in the bass and keep the same voicing in the right hand, right, that C, which was the root of the previous chord, everything gets moved up a third. So that C is now a third, the E is the fifth, the G is the seventh, and the B is the ninth. So he's sort of adhering to that principle over in this area here. Okay, I could spend an hour on this tune, but let's move forward. And what would this be without talking about Hans Zimmer? So this is from Pirates of the Caribbean. And let me play the melody. 1, 2, 2. Okay. Obviously, the rhythmic bit there is very motivic. Da da da, da da da, da da da, da da da. What's he doing there? Well, he's filling in an interval, and every downbeat lands on a strong note of the chord. Pretty much. So if we go, lands on the third of the D minor chord, third of the G minor chord, root of the D minor chord, third of the G major chord, fifth of the B flat, fifth of the D minor, third of the E flat major. And in classical music, if you're in the key of D minor and you have a chord built on the flat second, that's known as the Neapolitan, right? So, and that's typically, here he's got it in the root position, but that's typically in the first inversion. And I think the reason why he doesn't play it in the first inversion is it's got the G in the melody, and that would be a little boring. So that's basically what he's doing here. If I would just play the downbeats. And then just the motion leading into it. An hour on Vertigo would be great. Yeah, maybe I'll do that. I do have other like piano reductions. I also have, you can find it online. The University of Santa Barbara has his complete handwritten orchestrations for all his film scores. And I've got the handwritten orchestration. I got a PDF of that from Vertigo that I study. It's really amazing. Okay, so you can see this here, how that works, right? It's very catchy. Very catchy, and you can make a whole bit from that, just that motivic idea in melody writing. It's such an important concept, So if you're watching this and you're an intermediate or beginner and you want to start writing melodies, take some of these techniques, right? Figure out like a 3-note idea and then see how you can place that in the form of, like, let's say an 8-bar phrase, and then what kinds of things can you do to connect those phrases? Remember with yesterday. Right? Just that simple 2-note phrase, but then the connection, right? And then, when we're looking at the Jerome Kern. So instead of him just going, right? That would be boring, but he did a little. And then he held the third over one, right? Third. So in other words, he delayed that third coming in by 1 quarter note in a few of those spots and kept a common tone between the previous chord and that chord that you're on, sort of preparing you for that. So these are all kinds of things. The Henry Mancini, he took a simple triad, approached it from half step with a rhythm. Thelonious Monk, triad. Right? Very simple idea, just playing a triad, but he's got a certain rhythmic contour, and then he's got that half step action. And it's interesting because the Thelonious Monk, right, it's an F major triad starting with the C that gets arpeggiated, but he approached it from a half step below. And then the second measure is a chord that's a half step above, right? So you see how all this stuff kind of, when you really start looking at these things, and that's sort of a motive as well, that idea of a half step above, below and above. So on all these different levels, they can come together. And the end result is that if you're successful at this, you get something that's incredibly catchy. So that's a tune of mine, right? That's the FIFA World Cup theme for Fox Sports. But again, very Motivic all the way through. The tune's going to be on air forever, as long as Fox runs the World Cup. So, thank you, Starlight Sign. I do like sharing this stuff. I'm getting older now, and I want other people to benefit from my struggles to learn all this stuff, because it's been difficult to learn. Anyway, so we've been at this for about an hour and 10 minutes. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. If you like this video, give a thumbs up. For more content, please subscribe, and to be notified, ring that bell. I have another episode I've got next week, so I already know what I'm doing next week for Inside Track, which will be episode 7. I'll put it up on my timeline on YouTube, on the community page, so you'll see what it is. It should be another good one. And thank you so much for watching. I've been Pete Calandra, and I hope to see you on the next one. And if this is after the fact, leave comments in the comment section. I'll look at it and answer it if I can. All right? Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.